Firelight Radio, don't touch the dock, 'cause here we go. You're just in time for the show at Firelight Radio. Hey, welcome everybody, this is Bob, and just a quick interview here. I got Rudi at the campfire. You guys stop by.
Oh, hey, hi. Hey, Bob. Oh, nice fire. Glad I like what you're doing here. It's always good to be asked back. Thanks for asking me on to the campfire.
We wanted to talk a little bit about the Centennial Campfire Trilogy. That's the 3 books we co-wrote. And by co-wrote, I don't know what that means. I mean, it was, did he write one page, I write the other? How did it work? It was, you think writing a book is hard, try writing a trilogy. And you think writing a trilogy is hard, try co-writing a trilogy. The books are the books are, again, the trilogy is called the Centennial Campfire Trilogy, and the first book's Legend of Campfire Charlie, the second book's Last Stand at Boulder Ridge, and the third book's The Final Campfire. And we wrote it, when I say we, I say it loosely, because we were never at the same room in the same time, and I was probably the driving engine. I was definitely the driving engine behind it, but I always looped around with Rudi, because it all started as campfire talk, and I knew that we had creative chemistry. And from that campfire talk and put it into a book, neither of us are authors, and it was, what it was, and we got it done. A lot of people talk about writing a book, but we got it done in a trilogy, 3 of them. So, Rudi, what are your kind of thoughts on the kind of just right out of the gate? Give them to me.
Well, the trilogy, I thought, in just the whole project, I think of it as a conversation. Just between you and I have a certain chemistry. We have a chemistry at our campfire talk, and the way it develops from that talk into the idea for maybe a pamphlet, and then later on for a book. And the trilogy became sprawling. It became a, kind of bigger than we envisioned, and it's still an ongoing project.
Yeah, for me, the books kind of put me on a new path, and I enjoyed the process. For me, I think writing was, you had to be inspired, and you come up with this initial really nice vignette, but you could rarely return to it or even kind of modify it or expand upon it. And I think for me, I developed a writing process, and that allowed me to, as you would say, build the transcontinental railroad, but then also build the townships around it and the infrastructure around it. Because I would read, I would review, I would edit. I did that every night, sometimes multiple times per day, and it was a cycle. And when I did that, it kept everything fresh in my mind, and then I started to see how the different sections interrelated. I did a lot of it just outside too. We talked about the campfire, but I did a lot of the writing outside. So for me, it was the writing process that really I discovered maybe a side of myself. And you want to finish the book, you want to get the book done, but it's that process that ultimately sustains, makes it enjoyable, and in the sense that any work can be enjoyable. I think we think enjoying things is sitting on a soft cushion somewhere and eating grapes. But I think, leisure is sometimes boring, and it's work that really gets our juices flowing. So, about the books, think about the one was kind of a clairvoyant moment for you, when you kind of were in it and like, hey, I think we're on to something, and you started kind of get hot on the trail.
Well, I think what made it for me, probably the interesting thing for me, I've never, other than short stories in high school, I'd never really taken a crack at fiction, and I found that I could really do some character development. just
true.
Yeah. I mean, putting together the story, you really built the railroad for the story, and it built where the story was going to go as far as trajectory. I think my role was more developing characters and building those characters, and somehow maybe adding and suggesting additions and detractions for the story when needed. Sometimes we were. There were certain things, as you know, that I insisted upon, and I found that it's something I could do. It's something that we could do together, but really something that worked. And before we knew it, we had a storyline and we had some fairly well-developed characters.
Yeah, for me, I think as much as I developed a writing process, I would say I always enjoyed looping back around with you. Even if I couldn't get a hold of you. And increasingly, as we got into book 2 and definitely book 3, you were just man overboard. You were, but I always, I remember you giving me obscure passages that you hand wrote. I said, how am I going to use this? And I said, okay, well, here, I like this. This is how we could use it. And I would weave it into the story. Or other times where you would talk about doing, this extravagant write-up of this character. And then weeks later, I'd say, hey, just send me what you have so we can get this down. And you'd have one sentence. And but because you spoke about it so much, I took it and I ran with it and did what I could with it. Lieutenant French and the Dinosaur Bone Wars come to mind in that regard. Even Frog Legs. We spoke about that, and then I assigned it to you, and you never. And then I said, we actually forgot about it. I said, yeah, what did you ever do with that? And you said nothing. So I ended up doing it, and then in the final, you said, hey, I wrote Frog Legs. And I said, no, you didn't write any of it. I wrote the whole thing. I mean, I looped around with you on it, but I pretty much wrote that whole thing. And anyhow, so there's the process and the comedy, the high comedy, the frustration, and just the kinship of working with you on it, So does any book or passage really jump out for you? What book, or what passage in what book, jumps out?
Oh, sure. What comes to mind? Oh, hey, will you hand me a log? Yeah, the fire's a little bit low. We're on embers here. All right, hey, thanks. Here. All right. I'm gonna grab a little bit of newspaper and stuff. The newspaper is great kindling.
There you go.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the process of writing Boulder Ridge. And if you remember, what we did is we took basically I think you and I, we've been to different national parks, and, you have some that are larger than others, and they're all different, the way they're run. The people are different. I would say the culture around each national park unit shapes it. It shapes the people that are working there. And, we kind of did a parody of, with Boulder Ridge. I think, Boulder Ridge National Park, and it's a national historical site.
Right.
We kind of took the elements of, people we worked with, and kind of even the eccentricities of people who visit the park, and, your academic experts about, things like wildlife or history, and the strange little, historical stories that surround the park environment, and sometimes the personalities. I think I modeled, the staff, the very small staff at Boulder Ridge. We modeled them. I came up with it's either you or I who came up with a character he isn't present in the story except in kind of spoken of in passing, and I think in the film at Boulder Ridge, but I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I think in the opening book, I really like the Sweetwater section. And then how it switches gears to, in The Legend of Campfire Charlie, to his childhood. The childhood set in Missouri, but it could very well be in Maryland, where I grew up. And when I say Maryland, I mean Harford County. I always say I'm a Marylander, but I'm really from Harford County, one county, and all the other 23 counties, or 22 counties, might as well be, different countries. I just knew Harford County really well. And, so that also then launched, that opening structure of the book launched on this very long process of, okay, there's 3 books here. So in the opening book, I would say the part about the protagonist's childhood really rings true and kind of clues the reader that this story is about a campfire, but going in a completely different direction. How about you? Anything from that opening book, or the second book, or the third?
I think of myself as a native Floridian, a peninsular Floridian. I think North Florida, and even for me, I think South Florida, until I started living there, was a different country, kind of terra incognita. But I'm from a small town on what's called the Space Coast. It's called Rockledge. No one's ever heard of Rockledge, but people have heard of Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach space program. So I'm really a child of, my folks came from New York City to work there. So I look at them as immigrants to Florida, and I think of myself as a Floridian more than anything else, and specifically a Central Floridian. And Bob, you see, my hot dog fell in the fire. Can you get me another one out of the cooler?
Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah, here you go.
All right, hey, yeah, the stick I'm using isn't very good. All right, let me swap that. All right, that'll work. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we all have, and it occurred to me, like you were saying, you're from a county in Maryland, but one of the things that I thought of when I went on deployment to the Middle East when I was in the reserves back in 2012, 2013, and I read a lot. I read a lot of history, historical novels, all kinds of things, but it occurred to me that in my reading, I didn't read very much about Florida history, Florida nature, and I work at a national preserve where I'm paid to know about the history and the nature. And it turns out I realize I know more about that part of Florida than I know about where I'm from or anywhere else in Florida. So I made a resolution to read as much as I could about Florida history, Florida nature, Florida, subcultures, anthropology, what have you, when I returned. And I ended up reading, kind of impressed with myself, 37 books just on Florida history, like a marathon for 2013.
That's pretty incredible. I always.
And I'll just chime in real here, quick here. I forgot to say, what the book's about. It's about the day in the life of a Park Service ranger who is, at the end of the day, after working a very long day at a visitor center in the middle of the South Florida swamps, that is going to give a campfire talk. And the question quickly becomes, is he ever going to make it to that campfire talk? So it's, the story is very simple. And I think it's a very American journey of, just getting through the day, right? Getting to the campfire talk, and then what's going to happen at that campfire talk, and the journeys along the way to getting there. And, at face value, it almost has an Alice in Wonderland type quality to it. What do you think, Rudi? Is there what other elements of literature or books of literature might resonate or it be in the same category as?
I think that there are many. Florida literature is a growing, it's a growing bibliography. And, but I think for me, for example, one of the first things I read upon my return was Peter Matheson's Shadow Country, which is about the Lossman's River, specifically kind of the mangrove estuary. And I remember the characters and the people there. I even modeled some of the and also nonfiction memoirs, like, for example, Everglades Patrol by the late Tom Shirley. I never had the opportunity to meet him. He was in his 80s, and when I returned, he passed away. But he was a Florida Fish and Wildlife officer back in the 70s and the late 60s. And I through his book, through his memoir, I learned about people living in and around Homestead who had specifically, the Roberts clan, who had lived in the park and still hunted there. They were also poachers, kind of resentful of, the Park Service and its regulations. And I began as a segue after reading that literature and actually learning about some of these people. Sig Walker, for example, a kind of a legendary gladesman of the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. I began to talk to some of the people who'd come into the visitor center, or people I would encounter out when just patrolling around, and they would know some of these figures, and they would know something about these periods in history, and I started to get a feel, more of a feel for the people who lived and recreated and lived and hunted and fished and camped in the swamp. That whole, I guess you would call the Gladesman subculture.
Yeah, I think, and it is a large canvas work. I mean, there's so much packed in. I think that's why we're doing this abridged version. Started pecking away at it. The first 3 books are a deep read. I mean, they're almost 500,000 words in total, all 3 books combined. Book length is about 60,000 words, so we had 450,000 words. Really, so to abridge a version, I wanted to get it closer to 100,000, 100 to 150. Definitely under 200. And so you could sit down and read the story in one read. And the thing that changed for me during the process, it's kind of been a 2-year hiatus, is the arc of the story has continued to evolve. So I'm pretty confident that the abridged version and where it goes, particularly at the end, is going to be distinct from the arch of the original books. And I think, and it's not like we have to go back and change the original books. No, this is an evolution in thought. And the evolution, each book took about 2 years to write. And that gap of 2 years between the completion of the 3rd book and now this abridged version, not that I've been spending my time doing other things and you guys have as well, but I think it's allowed the story to breathe a little and speak back to us. What do you think?
Well, we've spoken about this, paring it down and doing what, back to Matheson's Shadow Country. Do you remember the old Killing Mr. Watson trilogy?
Right.
Many people read the first book, and the other 2 books just weren't well received. So what Matheson did is took the trilogy and just kind of welded together like a bell, in the words of one reviewer, like a very well, like an iron bell. And it just came out, people loved it. I think of the trilogy as almost like it's a sprawling work. It's a sprawling work. It's kind of a rough stone in many, many ways. Because we wanted to finish it. In some ways, we got bogged down, like the Stanley Powell story. Some things within the trilogy could be a book in itself. And I figured we could make some changes, make the story and some of the characters, I thought, maybe a little darker, because we are talking in some ways about outlaws.
Right, darker, and I think the other thing we discovered is...
Well, and just to end, and in closing, for me, I knew I was in the writing groove when the story started to speak to me. At one point, you're trying to get words on the paper, but then all of a sudden, the characters are talking to you. They become alive. And that's when you know that you're onto something that is worth pursuing, and it becomes a real, energizing. I always say we had good chemistry, but I think I started to develop good chemistry with the book, and it became, that writing process became, a companion for me in many ways, So there you have it. Hey, Rudy, thanks so much for stopping by the campfire. It's always enlightening to spend some time with you in front of the campfire and, talk turkey about what was, what is, and, what's going to be. Whatever that is, however it shapes up. So thanks for being here,
Oh, yeah, do that. Yeah, it keeps, I don't know what kind of wood you're using. Yeah, that's really dangerous. You gotta watch that. Were you using the grass shavings around here?